It was 14 years ago this week in which the day of infamy, now known as 9/11, occurred. And yet, sadly, over the course of time, whenever there is polling about how many people believe that 9/11 was a so-called inside job, a controlled implosion, the numbers go up. One recent poll showed that 15% of Americans actually believe the U.S. government was somehow involved in perpetrating a 9/11 conspiracy. Well, I have with me today Ron Craig. He's one of Canada's foremost firearms and explosives experts, and he has put together a presentation that he's shown on campus debunking the major conspiracy theories that the 9/11 truthers trot out, and he's going to do a little of that today. Ron, glad to have you on the Rebel Media.
Great to be here, David.
Let's get right to the
Sure.
the main 7 theories. First and foremost, conspiracy websites claim there is scientific evidence that explosives were used to bring down the Twin Towers. What's your response?
There's not one iota of scientific evidence that explosives were used to bring down the towers. Absolutely none. And it's incredible to me how they'll go on about it, and it's based basically on 2 things. Photographic evidence that they interpret it to make it look like and say it is explosives, and personal testimonials. People say, I heard an explosion, I heard something go bang. And I can tell you, when a building is in the process of deconstruction, there are lots of noises that are unexplainable, but that doesn't mean there was explosives.
Myth number 2, Ron. Thermite was used to cut the steel columns, which resulted in the structure collapsing. What do you say?
Of all the mythologies around 9/11, that is one of the strangest. Common sense and science tells us that for steel to melt, there has to be a constant heat. I mean, all we have to do is just think about it for a minute and look at a blast furnace. As long as it's heated, it's molten. And as soon as it's poured, it becomes, again, a solid. There is an interesting clip on YouTube,
Yes.
and it shows 2 people making a small thermite charge and putting it on top of the engine block of a car. And you can see that it burns through, there's no question, but as soon as the molten metal hits the ground, it solidifies and turns gray. So how could there possibly be a river of material running for 30 days under the World Trade Center buildings? It's absolutely incredible to me. But the proof that they offer, they will show a group of firefighters around a hole, looking into a hole,
Yes.
and it appears to be hot, because you can see it's very bright and there's smoke coming out of it. And that's the proof that they offer that this underground river of steel was running for 30 days. Yet I uncovered a video clip that shows that it's actually a work light. And when the work light is moved, all of the firefighters are standing there looking into a hole where there's no molten metal. Quite incredible.
Incredible. I've seen that clip. It's not thermite, it's just the afterglow from the work light they're using. Myth number 3, Ron. People inside the Twin Towers were literally blown off their feet by the explosions.
When an airplane hits a building with the kind of power that that airplane did, or the 2 airplanes, at around 700 miles an hour, the entire structure is like a tuning fork. The airplane hits it, the vibration goes down to the ground and comes back up. So naturally that would knock you off your feet. But if it was an explosion that knocked you off your feet, if you were that close, you would have thermal burns, because when an explosive goes off, it creates heat. But you'd also have what are called primary blast injuries. That's injuries to the eye, to the bowel, and to the other soft tissue. So consequently, not one person presented themselves at any emergency ward anywhere in New York City with primary blast injuries, so you can discount that immediately.
Myth number 4, Ron. Huge clouds of dust rejected from the building indicate explosives were used inside the buildings.
Every conspiracy website says that is proof positive that explosives were used to bring down the building. But we have to look at the facts, and the facts are quite specific. When the World Trade Center building was built, there were no sprinklers in it at all. The fire suppression was really drywall. They put in 5 inches of drywall in some cases to prevent fire from moving from one part of the building to the other. So as the building collapsed, all of this drywall became dust, which created huge dust balls, just amazing formations. But that doesn't mean there was explosives, because explosives would have ejected out 300 or 400 feet past the pattern that we saw, which was just dust coming down and debris.
Myth number 5 then, Ron. Building number 7 did not sustain any damage and collapsed because explosives were used to bring building number 7 down, you say?
That's the holy grail for conspiracy theorists, because they say, okay, 2 planes ran into the 2 buildings, 1 and 2, so we can understand how that collapse mechanism may have worked, but we still believe explosives brought it down. But explain building 7. Well, new photographic evidence has been uncovered that shows that there was considerable damage to the building, to the rear of the building, that we didn't see before because the video views were straight on. But let's look at building 7, because there are a couple of things that are very interesting about that whole case. Number one, everyone was evacuated from building 7, and as a result, the firefighters made no attempt to go in and fight the fires. And the conspiracy theorists will tell us that office fires are not very hot, but in fact, we know from experience that when there is a fire inside an office building, the fire is extremely, very hot, and it moves quite quickly. So you can appreciate that a building that's been left to burn all day without any kind of fire suppression because the water had been cut off to the sprinkler system is in a process of deconstruction, as every building is that's on fire. And if you take a look at how the building was built, you can see where if any of the joints failed, the building would collapse. And that's clearly what the evidence shows, is that the joints failed and the building came down on itself.
So another gotcha moment bites the dust there too, Ron. Myth number 6, no steel-framed building has ever collapsed from fire.
That's the mantra that's chanted by 9/11 conspiracy theorists as proof positive that explosives brought down the building. But in fact, steel-framed buildings collapse all the time. Just to give you an example, in southwestern Ontario, a couple of years ago, firefighters went into a building. It was a steel frame building. It was a very lightly constructed building. The roof collapsed and killed the firefighters. So collapse is something that firefighters understand and occurs. But when they say no steel frame building has collapsed, they're really saying large steel frame buildings. And in fact, if you take a look at the Delft building, which took in Holland, a fire started from a coffee maker that water had dripped on. The fire was allowed to burn all day. The firefighters didn't fight it. They couldn't get to it. The sprinkler system didn't work because there were no sprinklers in that particular part of the building. And if you look, you see the total collapse of that part of the building. So I have no idea why they say that steel frame buildings never collapse from fire. That's patently untrue.
It's good we have someone like you to research the history of these buildings. Finally, Ron, myth number 7, a stream of sparks ejected from the building is proof that a high energy event took place that was not a result from the fire. What say you?
Whenever there's a fire, you'll see mysterious things. And one of the things that we see clearly in the footage is we see sparks being ejected from one of the floors of the building. So the question is, what caused it? Well, the conspiracy theorists will tell us that it was thermite that caused it. That's proof positive that thermite was used to cut the beams, causing the building to collapse. But in fact, as a firefighter, I can tell you there are many things that will eject streams. Let me give you an example. I was fighting a car fire a number of years ago, and I put a stream of water into the car, and sparks ejected up into the air about 20 feet up into the air, which was very curious. I pulled back the hose, and I then put the fire hose back onto the fire, and another stream of sparks came out. Later we discovered that what had happened is one of the suitcases had a metal handle that caught on fire, and when the water hit it, it caused this ejection of sparks. So to say that this has never been seen before is ridiculous. And let me also tell you, experiments have been carried out using plaster of Paris and other small substances, very unsophisticated substances, that will create exactly the same signature. So there's no way that we can say it was directly caused by thermite. It just doesn't work.
Okay then. Well, I guess the bottom line, Ron, you have adroitly demolished the 7 smoking guns that are used by the 9/11 truthers. One last question. What do you think the reason is for these people coming up with these theories? Is it just simple ignorance in the fact that they don't have your type of explosives training? Or is this something that they just want to believe because what was already a fascinating story becomes even more fascinating if this was indeed a cover-up by the U.S. government?
Every conspiracy theorist is emotionally invested in the argument that the United States government caused it. And if you scratch any 9/11 conspiracy site with a coin, what you're going to find are people that have a deep dislike for the United States, the policies of the United States, and particularly the president of the time, George W. Bush. So they keep working tirelessly to try and find evidence that indicates that the government was involved. But there's no scientific proof whatsoever that explosives or thermite brought those buildings down, and yet they keep insisting that they did. It's quite incredible to me.
Incredible indeed. Well, there you have it, folks. Ron Craig, has debunked the main conspiracy theories by the 9/11 truthers. Hey, folks, consider this. What happened on that dark day 14 years ago was indeed a couple of hijacked aircraft flying into those buildings and causing the deaths of almost 3,000 people. It's too bad some other people out there want to read something more into this grotesque tragedy than already exists. For the Rebel.media, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies.